One of the biggest questions facing the industry today is how will the recent election and those elected will change just about everything, change policy on goods, services, availability, rules, regulations, costs, everything from tariffs that affect the cost and availability of goods, or AI, building restrictions, or events, cultural issues. How might our social and societal issues change the very nature of the design and architecture communities? What's next? How the recent election will affect design. No matter who wins, changes are coming. How can the business of design adapt to these changes and thrive at the same time? Will additional tariffs change the pricing model for goods? How will new regulations affect transportation, fuel usage, and household appliances? During these uncertain times, we're all looking for a bit more stability and direction, a little less chaos. Am I right? Learn how to best navigate the changes and the changing landscape and better prepare your design firm and clients for the future. This was moderated by yours truly, featuring Scott Specht of Specht Novak, Eric Peterson from PHX Architecture, Shiri Dolgan of ASD Interiors, Joe Carline from Kligerman Architecture and Design. This year's presenting sponsor of the theater at the WestEdge Design Fair in 2024 was Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, a Best Buy company, an amazing company, a partner of Convo by Design for some time now. And you've probably heard me talking about them on the show. But listen, as a busy professional designer, you know how important it is to find the right partnerships that allow you to specify the right products for every project. Professionals like you don't just have time to waste. So let me tell you about one of my partnerships, and that's with Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home. They're here to serve you with expert, knowledgeable, and non-commissioned professionals to help you specify the right product for all your projects. Non-commissioned. That's important. And listen, the cherry on top is they have all your favorite brands that you would want for all your projects, just none of the sales pressure. They give you good information so that you can make the right decision for your clients, because that's what great designers do. And if that's not enough, check out the show notes, click on the link for more information about their Pro Rewards program that every designer should not only know about, but be a part of. This year at the WestEdge Design Fair, Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home presented the theater, which was home to all of the panels and programs that you're going to hear here on WestEdge Wednesdays, like this one. So, a little bit of backstory. This particular panel conversation is one of those that was kind of scary to put together because, as you might imagine, everyone that I told this idea to in advance, they were like, "It's not political, is it?" It's like, well, kinda, because I don't know how we can have dialogue and conversations in design and architecture without being aware and cognizant of things being political, because how else do you plan unless you sort of know? So that's the premise. That's where we're going with this. This is what you've gotten yourselves into. The other thing I wanted you to know is you don't have to worry about taking notes. I'm sure I can see all of you like, oh yeah, I'm going to take notes. Everything you say, I'm going to record it. You don't have to, because I have a podcast, and we're recording all these conversations, and in first quarter, starting in January, we do WestEdge Wednesdays, where we release one of these panel talks every Wednesday, hence the WestEdge Wednesday. And so you'll be able to hear it again, with links to all of our amazing panelists. With that, housekeeping, I think I got it all, right? That's it? Awesome. So with that, I would like to sort of throw it. We can start with you, Scott. Introduce yourself. Tell everyone a little bit about you.
Sure. Scott Specht, and I founded Specht Novak Architects about 30 years ago in New York, and we're in Austin, Texas right now. We do all kinds of stuff. We started off doing very, very inexpensive office spaces in New York City, like $25 a square foot office spaces. And we have slowly moved into other things, and we're doing mostly high-end residential now. So happy to be here.
Hi, everyone. Eric Peterson, PHX Architecture. I started about 24 years ago, and I'm based in Scottsdale, Arizona, with a crew of 30 people. We do high-end residential and boutique hospitality. I've got a satellite office with 4 architects in Beverly Hills, and started that about 5 years ago. And we're doing some really exciting projects in Los Angeles now. So excited to talk with you about this topic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shiri Dolgan. I am the owner of ASD Interiors. It's a design firm here based in Los Angeles, and this year we celebrated 20 years since I opened the company. We mostly focus on new construction, so single-family new construction, multifamily new construction, as well as some commercial projects.
Hi, everyone. Joe Carline. I'm a partner at Kligerman Architecture and Design in New York. We also have a Rhode Island office. We are focused mainly on high-end residential, and we have an interiors department as well. We are a partnership of 5 partners founded by Tom Kligerman about 30 years ago.
So the first thing I want to ask, and Joe, you went last, so I'll ask you first. When does politics, not the who's elected, but the policy, does that affect the manner in which you operate your business?
That's a great question, and I've been thinking about it since we first were broached with this topic, and it's changed a lot since we first were broached. But really, on the day-to-day, no. Policies for our work in high-end residential are not, we're not taking them on a granular day-to-day basis and baking them into the designs. But when you think about it over the span of maybe 5 years, absolutely. We are faced with all kinds of challenges today that we weren't faced with 5 years ago because of policy changes. And you just have to make yourself aware of them, and that's the real challenge. Sometimes you get your blinders on when you're designing homes, and you, as an architect, you tend to be systematic about your designs and do things that you've done before. And that said, you really have to, in this day and age, be quick and nimble and aware of the policies and forward-looking. And that's what we're trying to do more and more in our office, is be really forward-looking for the next 4 to 5 years and get ahead of the curve on learning about what policies are going to do to our business before they happen to us.
Shiri?
So for our business, focusing on interiors and specifying, it's not so much policy that is a direct effect right away. Like what you're saying, it takes some time, but really what you're seeing right away is the behavior of clients. They are either tightening up, or they're also conscious of all of a sudden, hey, the things that we specified that we're getting ready to procure, are these things made here in America? Are they coming from somewhere else? Are they going to come in? They start to have an extra thought in their mind about what are we procuring, what's being specified, and so it's their behavior that starts to tighten up that we see right away.
I would say, most of our clients are looking at the stock market. So anything that would directly affect the stock market is where they're going to pivot. Where they're not paying this with loans, so interest rates really don't matter. And so direct policy every single day doesn't matter, but if it starts to impact the stock market, they're literally watching it every day. And I've had some sitting in a meeting, like literally with the stock market going, maybe we could add more, maybe we could add less, and doing it right on the spot. But we've definitely had it where it's jumped up and they've said, okay, expand the budget by $1 million or so. And then on the hospitality side, certainly when times are better and people are traveling, that helps with the hospitality market. Actually, COVID really sparked a huge boom for us, both in the golf industry and in the hospitality market, because that allowed the opportunity for hotels that hadn't done anything for a long time to actually close and spend some money doing things, and so that offered a great opportunity. And we even thought for a while the PGA was responsible for COVID because it literally saved golf. And every club in the United States is suddenly flush with members and has tons of money that they could spend when literally 2 years before that they were ready to close.
Yeah, I think the accumulation of wealth at the top of the clientele list has really made a big difference. I think what used to be called a high-end home has changed dramatically over the past few years. I mean, you see it with products that are coming out. There is some stuff that would be considered extreme a few years ago that's now expected in high-end homes. So that prompted a lot of our move from other things into it. On a direct policy level federally, though, I think one thing that we can see coming is at the end of his term, it didn't get a lot of publicity, but Donald Trump mandated with that all new federal buildings in Washington, D.C. be of a classical style of either Roman or Greek origin, and specifically excluded anything with brutalist or postmodern, or I think it was postmodern or something like that term. So I would expect that to come back in the new term and maybe be applied to all federal buildings. So doing public work could change dramatically.
You know what's interesting about that too is, to your point, and I remember that, and I was wondering if that was going to be a thing, but also if anyone remembers, there was an issue with toilets and showers. If you remember 4 years ago that the low flow was terrible and we got to go back to that. This is kind of the reason we're having the conversation. And I want to ask you, each of you, and maybe we can open this up for discussion, is how do you design when a project isn't going to be completed in 2 or 3 months? Some are ground up and you're talking about 3-4 years. How do you design? How do you specify? How do you create on shaky ground and not knowing what the foundation is going to be like underneath you? Eric, I'll start with you.
Well, it's at the time that we get permitting is typically when the policy has to be in place. So one of the things that's currently happening is the energy code. So, in places like Texas where things were very loose and there wasn't a lot of policies on energy, we could do these big expansive glass pieces. Arizona's sort of in the middle on those types of codes, and certainly California is the most extreme. And these big homes that have glass from end to end are getting more and more difficult to be able to achieve under each of these different policies as it relates to energy code. But as that code starts to get adapted, through different states, then that's going to get stricter and stricter. So those types of policies, when you say, well, with a custom home, we could design whatever we want, it's not actually that true anymore as those things start to, but it's at the time. So if at the time, a lot of policies start happening, even with environmental as it relates to how much coverage you could take on a house as far as the land use, and that happens in Beverly Hills as well, where you could do a house of a certain size and you can't disturb the property, and those regulations get tighter and tighter. People are trying to get in with permits prior to those legislation pieces being enacted, and as soon as you get it in, then you could take your 4 years to build it and it's going to be grandfathered in. But then anytime you change the house or go back in for a remodel, you might have to go under the new code. So those smaller kind of pieces, especially as it relates to environmental, is where we're seeing the biggest, watches to how it's going to affect how we want to design.
Just a follow-up to that, because I want to ask Joe first, then Scott, because you're in New York, which doesn't mean you don't work elsewhere, but New York in particular, which has also outlawed LNG for residential. I don't think you could put natural gas in any new projects in New York.
Yeah, in the city, they're banning natural gas for new developments.
So you've got that juxtaposed against Scott. You're in Texas. Oil and gas. I don't know that they will ever do a mandate like that. So, how do you? Are you designing differently than Scott?
I mean, I would say yes. In New York, in particular, it's really, it's very different in New York than. We have like a team of specialists in the office who specialize in New York. They know New York. If a New York project comes in, they tackle it, or they do the initial design because they know the framework. If we're working in Long Island, it's a completely different, it's almost like a different state. Different jurisdictions obviously have more or less strict energy codes and quirky regulations around fire and life safety that can really affect design from an early get-go. So we have to have people who specialize in those areas, and it does affect what we do. And I would say, on a energy code level, it doesn't. The horizon is so long for these things to get put in place that it gives us enough time to ramp up and learn. But where it gets a little tricky is when federal rebates for particular high efficiency, air conditioners or whatever come into play, and they get taken away, which it looks like they might get taken away. We design a lot around those very specific things. For example, geothermal has been very popular in the Northeast because of the federal tax credit, and it looks like that's maybe going to get phased out pretty soon. So we're looking ahead at what that does to our buildings and how we now have to go back in time and do what we did 5-10 years ago in terms of air conditioning systems, because those more expensive systems won't be selected by our owners, our clients.
Yeah, we do work all over the country, and it's every time it's a learning experience as to what the local codes are. It's mind-boggling sometimes, and it's kind of anti-intuitive. Sometimes, like Dallas and Austin have very strict energy codes, so sometimes you would expect, use as much power as you want kind of attitude, but it doesn't actually exist there, although it's changing. There are always ways to get around these things too, and that happens a lot. Clients ask for it, and you insulate certain parts of the house more, and you can put in the big glass doors. So there are a lot of regulations that are applied, and you have to pay attention to them when you do permitting, and then there's a lot of leeway after that point, after that fact. So it doesn't always affect the design. We do a lot of similar kind of designs in different places with very different regulations.
But, and I think we've kind of gotten to the point where you have to be aware. You have to have these conversations now. You can't do head in the sand and ignore it, because it's not going away. Shifting to something else that I think is on everybody's radar, it's probably the most asked question right now, is tariffs and what's going to happen next. It's fascinating to me. If you look at products from Europe, 10 to 20% everywhere, and then China, 60 to 100%, that can blow the doors off a budget. Sherry, how do you have that conversation with clients?
The most important thing in understanding this idea of tariffs and what's going to happen with the tariffs is to have an open conversation with the client. None of us really know the answer to this. To this day, we don't exactly know what's going on. There isn't another president in office yet. And until things get executed, we are going to have an open conversation. We're going to say, if X, Y, and Z gets put into place, then we need to have a conversation about pivoting. We have to be flexible in our decision making. We have to understand that there are going to be some changes, potentially, if it's something that's so uncomfortable that it's going to raise the budget to a point that we cannot meet our deadlines, we cannot meet the expectation of the project, then there has to be fluidity. There has to be coming from the design end and also from the client end, so that way they understand what's coming.
Or tell them to buy American.
Or tell them to buy American. And it's a conversation happening. I was literally buying plumbing for a whole house the other day, and the client is asking, okay, where is this coming from? Where is it being made? Because if it is coming from out of the country, there's a hesitation now. It just is there.
We used to throw in value engineering, just as, we'll do value engineering if you need it. Now it's a special line item in our contracts that says if you have more than one round of value engineering, you got to pay our hourly fees, because it's always what happens. Things are bid out or they're priced by a contractor, and then it comes in double or triple because of this product. You can't get any more, and we have to change things out. So it's a lot of time and effort on our part to redo things during the course of a project.
But it's also just educating the client, because a lot of clients come in and they've seen their friends' homes and they want the French oak and this reclaimed beam from Italy, and they have things in their head that they're not aware that all of these things can be found with almost the exact same quality level in the United States. There's really great, in Salt Lake City, there's a great reclaimed wood manufacturer or company that there was an old trestle bridge that went across the Salt Lake, and when that bridge for the trains was taken down, all that wood looks exactly like French reclaimed old beams, and we've used that in a lot of older, like our sort of the Mediterranean style, and it looks spectacular. So just note, and then there's a fun story with it. Everybody could say, oh, this came from this old trestle bridge in Utah. And so just giving those options, us having that type of knowledge of all the types of products that are available, even Carrera stone, there's ways to get Carrera stone that out of Mexico and Texas and other places that have some of that same type of look that, limestone also. You don't have to go to France to get great limestone. Mexico has great limestone, Texas. So there's other materials that almost look exactly the same locally.
And it's true, the clients right now fight and they want what they want. They're still fighting right now about a gas stove. And it's going to be a hard fight and a long fight. And a lot of them don't know until they get into a project and they go, oh my God, I have to buy electric, I have to buy induction. They don't know, they're not aware until we educate them. And then we have to, reel it in and tell them it's going to be okay.
And I want to ask you about the education process, but here's the thing too. It's funny too, the moment you said Buy American, my friend Moya in the audience was like, yes! But here's the thing, and here's the issue too. So, Moya Living, stainless steel, U.S. steel. If it goes to a Japanese company, under the Biden administration, they weren't going to do it. Under the Trump administration, they might. What happens if a great American company is now bought by an international conglomerate? That changes entire dynamics that we don't have the answers to, right? And that's kind of where I wanted to get to is, and one other thing that I will add to this before I sort of throw it out there is, then you talk about labor. Well, if immigration policy changes, I mean, look, if we're going to be honest about this, not all of the labor that's used in our industry is documented American workers, or they have the green cards, or they have the visas to work here. What happens to fabrication? What happens to white glove delivery? What happens to the people who actually make the things that are made in America? You kind of have to factor that in too. And I guess my question for you is, how do you navigate the learning process? Because if you've got a big firm, it's great. You can sort of offload some of that and say to your junior designers, hey, brush up on this and download, let me know what I need to know. That's great. Small firms, they don't have the bandwidth to do that. How do you stay on top of the things that you need to know so that you can properly educate your clients? Go ahead. Anyone.
I'll start. No, well, here's the thing. Like what I was saying earlier, is it's fluid. It's coming into us from various sources, and we have to digest it and understand which project does that apply to? Who do we have to educate now? So part of it is it's coming, through us, through the design and architects, and we have to be able to use that information and place it where it's necessary. And now we also understand the manufacturing in America is not going to all of a sudden just unload and we're going to start making everything here. We don't have the population, we don't have the space, we don't have the ability to do what is being done overseas. And with the workforce, we also don't have the ability, if a chunk of the workforce goes, it's not like there's a big ship of people coming in to take over. It's just not going to happen. So we have to take this on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis and see how it unfolds in front of us and handle it as it comes.
Yeah, I tell you, if this is enacted, the construction industry in Texas will come to a grinding halt.
Exactly.
There is nothing that will get built in Texas. So
No.
I think that's true in the Northeast as well. I mean, it's really just everywhere. And the thing about educating clients is a really great question. And specifically, one of the things we're doing is pricing a job more than once, sometimes more than 3 times before we issue a construction set to keep up with the pricing, because we used to be able to predict what the price would be within 10%. Now, that's not the case anymore. It just changes so day to day. So active pricing is the way to get the clients on board.
That's for sure. It's, you'll do a schematic design and somebody will ask, well, what's this per square foot? We used to be able to throw out some answers, and I don't throw out any prices anymore. It's just too dangerous. So, yeah. You used to be able to build a modern house, too, not that many years ago. The standard number in Austin, at least, was $350 a square foot. You can get a pretty good modern house. You couldn't build anything for that now. So it's, yeah. It hit 1,000 at some point, and now it's just kept going.
Now we just don't say anything.
Don't say anything, yeah.
It's funny. I have a couple of stories for you. So you wouldn't know this, but I moved to Tulsa from LA. I moved to Tulsa 3 years ago. And I've got some stories for you that I think you're going to find fascinating. The first of which, post-pandemic, by the way, the pandemic was not the same in Oklahoma as it was in California or New York. It just was not. It was really interesting to go from one state in one condition to another state. No masks, no, I mean, everyone was separated more naturally, but big difference. One of the things that did happen, though, due to supply chain, and I want to touch on supply chain a little bit, but one of the things that happened, you might find this fascinating. So there weren't many framers, and there was one major framing company that operated in the region. And it was on the news. This was a huge story because this one builder came out and just dropped a six-figure bag of money on the framer's desk and said, "You work for us." The money wasn't for a job. It was to lock them in, which I don't know if it's legal to do that, but it was Oklahoma, so they did it. And that created ripples throughout the entire industry because none of the other builders could get anything framed for a huge window of time. When we talk about supply chain now, I think we're nearing the end of the point-to-point supply chain for a number of reasons. Sustainability, not the least of which is the issue, but the hub and spoke model, and the call centers and the distribution centers that are being built everywhere now. When you're looking and when you're planning your work and you're looking at your supply chain and your deliverables, do you calendar them now? Do you schedule them differently? Scott, I'll ask you first. Do you schedule them differently than you used to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really hit home during COVID when appliance manufacturers were taking a year and a half to get some things done. And, the contractors knew which brands you could get and which you couldn't. And you had to, the first thing when a house starts, as soon as you sign the contract, you sign on for the appliance package, because otherwise it was just not going to get there by the end of the job. So things have to get selected much, much earlier in the process. It used to be great. You design the house, you could just design the kitchen, and then go shopping for the appliances and be, confident that they were going to get there on time, and that's just not the case anymore.
In Arizona, it used to take a year to build a high-end custom home, and now it's at least 2 years. So that timeline has definitely changed. It is due to just the factors of labor just taking longer. There's more delays throughout the process. In California, it could be 4 years. So understanding that is really important in your fees, because if you're thinking still that construction time, which we're doing construction administration, is going to take a year, and you're now 4 years into it, you could have blown your entire fee. So understanding how that relates and knowing when you're talking to a contractor what that timeline is going to be is really important to figuring out how your fee structure is going to be, for sure.
It's really cute when a client thinks they're going to build a house in 6 to 9 months, because we couldn't even get appliances that fast. Like you're saying, about a year ago, 2 years ago, it was really rough with furniture as well. I mean, it was just back order for a really long time. Now it's better. But yeah, we have to select things so early at this point. And then again, we're just hovering over those vendors. And are we really going to get it in time? Is it really going to come? Because I think we have all PTSD from that time that it's just things were unavailable.
Yeah, it was a really sort of clarifying moment, the COVID slowdown with appliance deliveries, and actually loved it because it forced the issue to get owners to select what are very impactful pieces in the house very early. So now we build the house around the appliances, and we'll continue to do that, I think, for the rest of our careers. It's just to get it done early. It's a great early move.
And what's fascinating, and I think appliances is probably the bane of every designer's existence for that very reason. But what's interesting about that, too, is it's not just the appliances for the home. As we used to design, you'd have a kitchen, and that's where the appliances went. But now your outdoor kitchens are equally well appointed as the indoor kitchens. And then people don't have single kitchens anymore. You've got the kitchen and the dirty kitchen and the butler's pantry and the scullery, or you've got a kosher kitchen. And then you've got the wine bar, the weed bar, the coffee station. Whoa. I mean, the refrigeration in bathrooms now because of the GLP-1s and the makeup, right? It's astounding. Has that, I don't think it's possible to warehouse, but has that made you think about how you address supply to meet demand? Have you even considered warehousing product? You know, remember back in the days at Tract Homes, which, you know, here in Los Angeles, you would have the model home, and it's like, you've got all kinds of choices. You could pick one of these 3 appliances, right? But now, do you consider going with certain loyalty to certain brands and then possibly warehousing them or making special arrangements with those manufacturers or with those dealers? Does that affect the business at all?
In the hospitality world, for sure. So when we're doing a hotel, that because we have to have so much product and the time limit is really short, that we have to be in on that, they will make an association, an alliance with a major brand, and then get all of that product in. So if we're doing small refrigerators in every room and you need 300 of them, we get all of those in, because the time window that they have to do the construction might just be over a summer or an off season, and they have to be in right away. So they'll go ahead and purchase those all in advance and warehouse them so that when that time comes, they're installed.
Having been in this a long time, it's interesting. It used to be you would order your appliance package from one company and they would provide everything, and you'd get a good discount, like GE. You go to GE and say, I want all my appliances, and they'd send you a big package of those. There's no way to do that now. There are so many specialized appliances and different things. One company is never going to fulfill the needs for a house, so you can't do that. But we do end up going back to suppliers that we know are going to return calls and follow up. And I think I don't know if other designers have run into this, but it's a weird cultural shift that happened during COVID. People don't return calls like they used to. It's like they're not anxious for our business anymore. It's even people you do work with a lot, they'll just vanish for a long period of time and not. So it's harder to get things in that way. And I think that's caused these extensions to project timelines as much as anything.
It's customer service rep burnout, right? I mean, seriously, we were calling too much.
Let me drill down on that a little bit, because I think that that's a great point. I think that everyone in here has made phone calls that nobody answers anymore. People don't answer the phone anymore. We've sent emails. We'll get ghosted. Emails won't come in when you need them. When they need you, they will just put you on blast, and you'll be getting, and it happens. That is a fundamental change in our communications, and I think it's really interesting that I feel like many people in our industry have forgotten that each and every one of us, we're in a service industry. This is a service business. We provide a service, not necessarily a product. Even the people who sell a product are in a service business, because nobody has a monopoly on anything. And I'm curious, it's a real thing. Why do you think that is? When did that happen? And how do you combat it? When you've got, okay, white glove service, product delivered, there's a scratch, there's a dent, it's not the right product. That product has then been discontinued, or it's no longer available. Now you've got to respecify. Your client is extremely upset. You're trying to get somebody on the phone, because it always comes down to the designer. I mean, it's always on you. And you don't get your calls answered. Then what?
I think there's so much in there to unpack, because there's so many parts of that on a project. One of the funny things, which I think all of us have probably said at one time, is, oh, how did we all do this before email and texting and stuff? But the way that it was all done was with a phone call, because things can happen so quickly on a phone call. You can get answers quickly, you can get solutions, and things can move forward. But by the time you write out the email, and am I going to send it, and did I say the right thing, and did they see it? So much time has gone by, but a phone call can get things done quickly. So that's one thing. I think the overarching sort of what do you do when there's problems and answers, at the end of the day, our job is still a service job, and we have to be available as a human to respond to our clients and give them that service, either face-to-face or on the phone, but it has to be a human connection, because they want to know that they have been heard and that it's being taken care of. And usually at that point that they know that there is a solution underway, even if it takes an extended amount of time, they want to know that there's a human there backing them up and that it's going to be done.
That's why shows like this are so great, because you're literally seeing your rep in person and getting to know them. I personally know in a number of ways that whether it's a cabinet manufacturer or an appliance or a window manufacturer, that I'll go with the rep, with whoever they're repping at that time, because I've established that relationship and that trust, that if they switch to a different window manufacturer, I'll suddenly start working with that new window manufacturer just because I like that person so much that I know I'll get the service that I need. And so that personal connection and that person is always the most important to me because of that trust factor.
So you'll pull business or reallocate business based on service. You'll do that?
Yes.
Yes.
No, and conversely, you will stop using products where you don't get good service.
Regardless of how good the product may be?
Regardless of how it is. You would just, I mean, there are a lot of different replacements, things of equal quality that you can work with. So unless a client specifically says, I want absolutely this one product, we'll make other suggestions and say this one, you have a hard time getting it, or it's, there's a lot of fluctuation in price. Let's look for something else that we can find more easily or that provides better service.
And it all comes back to us again. We are the ones that have to pivot and find a solution.
I don't feel like we have this type of conversation enough. Is it safe to say that we focus usually on the form and function and beauty and price, and not really on the service side of the industry? And why
I
is
think
that?
in school, absolutely. I mean, in school, you never talk about this stuff, or even the business aspects of it. You're really involved in design. So it comes as a shock to a lot of younger people who come into the firm and see how much they have to deal with this kind of stuff. At least for our firm, they think they're going to be out there designing, and it ends up being talking to contractors and suppliers a lot of the time. It's a good thing, though. It's a good.
Well, let's pivot to something else that they don't teach you in school that has to be on everyone's mind, because here's what's next, right? And that's, we've been talking a lot about AI, and I don't think we're any closer to having answers on what we can do with AI as opposed to what's going to happen. And there's a lot of creatives, there's a lot of designers and architects who fear that AI is going to replace them and that they're going to lose their jobs. And you know what? They're right, because they're going to. And it's not because there isn't enough business for everyone. It's because the low end, the same people who bring in your Pinterest pictures and say, oh, I want that. Say, guess what? You know what? You can prompt that into an algorithm and get what you want and go find some builder to do that for you. You can absolutely do that. I would argue, though, that that's not the designer or architect's superpower anyway. It's the ability to understand true need and value and provide the service that gets that. The question then is, how do you use the incredible tools that are now available to us? I've spoken to some firms who are diving in, and they're really using it, and they're using it well in different ways, and others who simply use it for their blogs, and they're the ones who are probably going to get replaced, I would think. Do you employ any AI currently in anything that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you don't, you're going to find out the hard way pretty fast. We've actually put forth a small task force to bring in some new technology in the sort of junior staff, sort of more rote tasks, things that they can use. There are some great tools out there for non-critical tasks, things that you can sort of start slowly and build into your process. One thing I like to do, which is sort of a non-critical task, is review invoices with Adobe's AI. Matching numbers to spreadsheets is very easy with AI, and you can go back and double check it to make sure it's correct, but it's a huge time saver. That type of thing is great, just on the business end. Design-wise, I gotta say I'm not too worried yet. It's just not that good. I think the value that we bring is greater than just the design also. So even if they could present a picture to a contractor, the thing will not get built the way they want it or think it should be delivered without the architect involved. So, it's really, there are many ways to use it right now that are great for our business. And I can only think it will help But I think that, there will be some areas of architecture and interior design in particular, where it's not as complex. It's filling out a room with items is easier for a machine to do than putting a building together. Building is many more pieces. So just in terms of complexity, I would think interior design is more susceptible to sort of an intrusion in AI earlier.
I don't think of it so much as an intrusion in a negative way. I think there's a way to look at it like it is an additional tool to communicate. Because one of the things that we do at the forefront of a project is we are really trying to pull from a client, what the hell is it that you want? We're really trying to get into their mind. And so many times when a client is using vocabulary, like I want something contemporary, I want something transitional, well, the way that they say it might be different than what I'm thinking in my head. So we can use AI to generate something relatively quickly. But so much of what we do is the execution and how we execute a project. So it's great to have that as a stepping stone in the beginning of a project, to have the visual attachment to what we want to have as our final result. But the execution is so much still there.
Yeah, we did some interesting experiments where we typed in, present to DALL-E, give us an image of a house, a 3-bedroom house by Spec Novak Architects. And it generated some stuff that looked like it could have come out of our office, but it was all kind of wonky and off, and it just doesn't. And it was repetitive. It was taking pieces of what it had seen on the web and repurposing them in some way. So you're right. I don't think it's there. I do think the back end is the big place to use AI. It's a little bit the inverse of other industries, like the film industry and photography and a lot of other things. They're very worried because it's taken the creative part out of their business and left them with the sales things and the things they don't want to do. I think in architecture it may be the inverse, where it's getting rid of a lot of the back end stuff we don't want to deal with and allowing us to be more creative.
I have seen it used in a number of different creative ways. One, there's a architect that did all of his renderings by hand. So he fed in all of his previous renderings, all of the history of it. And so now he just pencil lines it, and then he says, finish it in my style, and it did. And it's absolutely perfect. It looks really great. So that's a speedy way to help finish it. And then, we all have spent hours and hours and hours pulling imagery to try to show our client, like, maybe a certain style or a direction, especially in the hospitality. If we're trying to create a new restaurant concept, and then all you can do is just try to find, but now you could just type it in and say, I want to find this type of imagery, and it could search the whole web for you and find all those without you spending hours and hours, or an intern spending that kind of time. So all of these time-saving things are really unique ways to use it, I think, that are really sort of safe. And then as it applies to actually our clients using it, the more AI can integrate into the home so that it's opening and closing windows and shades and adjusting the light and the temperature throughout the day, I think that's all day long going to be the way of the future, especially on luxury and even in luxury hospitality. You want to walk into your room, press the button, the shades open, the lights turn on, and in the evening, the lights all dim and change color. That I think all day long is going to be a great use of AI within the residential and hospitality world.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think, Eric, of everyone that's sitting here, I think your business, the golf course industry, is probably one of the most affected by AI. I mean, imagine, because their number one cost in most cases is water, right? And when you're in a Vegas or a Phoenix, water is literally liquid gold. And to be able to plug in 100 years of weather patterns, and then also the last 5 years of weather patterns, and to come up with a summarized projection of what water is going to look like, and then to actually change the courses so that the water flow and shade and things that you can actually take advantage of, you can actually do that. And to change things in real time and over time to account for what is going to be projected, I just think is fascinating. Do your clients look at that?
Well, yeah. I mean, specifically as it relates to golf course watering right now, that technology is unbelievable. So they, instead of like all the heads going on at the same time and maybe overwatering in some areas. We've all seen that on a golf course where there's a huge puddle in certain areas and it's dry in other areas. So every head now is individual and it has sensors that determines whether or not that has enough water or not. And every head will pop up individually throughout the course, throughout the day. It knows when people are on the course and what areas they're on it in. So that technology has saved golf as well, because a lot of environmentalists were saying we're watering golf courses too much. There's also reclaimed water that's being added into this as well. So all of that is making the golf course industry, sustainable.
And I simply mention that too because that directly affects commercial and residential, because water and weather patterns, they're changing. They always change. It's just, matter of fact, that's just the way it's going to be from now on, right? So you have to be able to plan for that. And I also think it's important, as we talk about what's next and we talk about policy directly affects our industry in so many ways. And I wanted to sort of pivot into a different direction. It's helpful to draw from the experience of other industries. My background is in broadcast. When I was in broadcast, our national lobbying organizations were really strong because they had to lobby the FCC for certain regulations, right? So you had the NAB, and you have local organizations, you have regional organizations, you have national organizations. We have groups. ASID is awesome if you're an ASID member. AIA, fantastic if you're an AIA architect, but it's isolated and it's very, very specific. Why don't we have, especially now, because policy in New York is so different than it is in Texas, and it will always be that way. The Midwest is going to be completely different than the South or the East. Why don't we have national organizations that represent the industry in total to help lobby for the things that we need, regardless of what part of the country you're in?
Well, the IA tries to do that, and I think there are a number of organizations that do. I think the money is not there compared to other industries, though, quite honestly. They do their best with lobbying for certain things, but I just think they don't have the pull that, say, the pharmaceutical industry or others might have. So it gets put on the back burner, and a lot of people don't see design as being the most critical, one of the most critical things to the functioning of the country. I think it's got an odd place in federal policy.
The construction industry budget for lobbying is many times more than the design industry, and every time AIA, for instance, creates a political committee to try to get policy, the construction industry, it's completely against the construction industry. So they fall short on that component. And even to the point where in Arizona, there was even legislation leading to possibly deregulating architects to not require licensing anymore. So we have to watch that as a slippery slope. They start with hair and nail salons and saying they shouldn't be licensed, and then that sort of leads to, they were starting to lead into landscape architects, interior designers, and then and the AIA says you guys better start watching it because next thing in line is going to be architects. You don't need a license to do a house in most states, but you do for anything hospitality or life safety in the public realm. But if we're not careful, we could end up being consultants to contractors in the future and losing our industry altogether. So that's sort of like the worst case long term if we're not really adamant about holding our ground.
New Jersey is the one oddball state. You have to be a licensed architect to do a house in New Jersey.
What is the way? So once you have an event take place, so we had the pandemic, right? Now, we had that in 1921, but nobody was around to experience that, so it goes away. We narrowly missed swine flu, bird flu. There were others that went elsewhere, but we narrowly missed them, right? I don't know anyone who will say that now that it's happened, it could never happen again. I think you kind of have to think about it in those terms. And knowing that, how do you future-proof the work that you do, what are some of the practices that you're employing on your work now that maybe you weren't doing pre-pandemic for to again future-proof them, but retrofit the concepts so that, I mean, look, more storage, more greater refrigeration capacity, and there are a ton of other things, I'm sure. How do you approach that? And once something happens, do you now factor that in? Because, and again, what's next? And you look at recent elections, I think the one thing that we can count on is that policy is going to change so rapidly that our industry can't possibly keep up with it. So it's up to you individually to put practices in action that can address those things. How do you address future-proofing your projects?
On a design level, it's the COVID model is, I think, one that will persist, and I don't see any slowdown. It seems to be accelerating, actually. The thing you brought up about kitchens is very relevant. Multiple kitchens, extended family living in one residence or multiple residences on the same property tends to be more popular now. But in terms of day-to-day practice, where we design, built-in sort of tricks or areas that we hold off on until we know an area in particular is like kitchens or multiple kitchens might be an area where the client is waffling. We're more nimble now, and we know that we have to sort of hold those areas to the end of a process, and that's why the kitchen appliance thing is so relevant. If we can force them to get that kitchen appliance decision early, it helps us execute at the back end. But being nimble is super important to our business, both in terms of staffing a job, being able to put people on long-term jobs, that some of these jobs are 10 years long, and then roll them into a job that may be a 6-month job, and then sort of having our staff be aware that their life is sort of different than it was back in the pre-COVID model, where they're going to be jumping around a lot more, and we're going to be utilizing people for very specific tasks. It used to be that everybody did everything. Now we're sort of branching away from that, where we're getting people who are doing more rendering as their sole position in the firm. Somebody might be their New York specialist, which keeps us sort of very nimble in New York. If New York code changes, we can address it specifically and quickly. So those are things that we're doing, and I think there's no slowdown. We're definitely going to have to be more nimble in the next year than we've ever been, because it seems like things are going to change crazy fast.
Sherry?
What's so interesting now is the conversation about the use of every space in a home is so important at the beginning of a project. In the last few years, and you have probably all had the same experience, is there are spaces in the home now which we had never built in the past. Things like inside of a primary closet, they want an additional secret primary closet as a hidden room. In another project I did in Pacific Palisades, they took in the basement, they had a huge walk-in wine cellar, and they converted that into a secret gun room for storage, for guns. And it's things like changing up the use of a room, what you would typically think is the formal dining room, which people are like, nah, I don't need that anymore. I need to have a space for sure that I can work at home, my kids can work at home. And so having that conversation has to happen now. It's not just an option, it has to happen in the project in the beginning.
Yeah, stepping way back, I think the title of this, talk, how's the election affect things? I see, and this has happened for a few years now, quite a few years, is that insecurity is driving design of houses now. And I think, you mentioned things like safe rooms and all that, but it gets back into a lot of stuff, like not relying on the power grid anymore. Used to be that was a given. Now every home has a backup generator or some other power source. Most of the houses we're doing now don't have windows on the front of the house facing the street. There's not a sense of community, and you're a part of that, and you're looking out your front window or sitting on the porch. They're blank walls, or they have multiple layers of fences or multiple defenses in them. So it's really changing the form of the houses that we do. as well as making them, a lot of these houses are so self-sufficient, you can just take them and plant them anywhere. Water is another one where, the demand for water storage tanks is huge. So I think that's the biggest change politically in design that's happened in the past 10 years, let's say.
Eric, thoughts?
Yeah, same. All of those things are being incorporated into ours, but the addition would be air filtration. It never was a real big component. We'd say if you wanted to add additional levels of that, and most of the time it wasn't thought through, but now adding the most, air filtration throughout the house has entered into their mind because of all of the talk through the pandemic.
And that's really a great point, because if you think about this too, if the EPA is shrunk, what do you think is going to happen to air quality, water quality? I mean, there are going to be changes. And again, we're in a service industry. If you're knowledgeable of this and you're talking to your clients about it, it's really interesting. Okay, last question. It's probably not the last question. I always say that, and it never is. Today it's going to be, maybe. So I wanted to ask each of you, because now with this particular administration, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is on the forefront. And Eric, you mentioned at the very top of this that you have clients who are actually checking the NAV, the value of their stock portfolios, to see what their budget is, which I think is fascinating. Have you considered, and Scott, I'll start with you, do you accept crypto currently, and have you considered, because I kind of feel like, Eric, to your point, if you're working with clients and you have a day where crypto spikes, you can lock in those gains, sell some coin, and increase the budget, lock it in, and get to work. Do you think in those terms yet, and do you think you will if you don't?
I haven't thought in those terms. We don't have a standard Bitcoin payment method for our firm, but it's a commodity like any other. I would consider it, certainly if a client insists on paying in Bitcoin. You can look up what the value is at the moment they decide to pay and go with that. It fluctuates so rapidly, it's hard to feel super comfortable about that, but I would not rule it out.
We're having enough trouble trying to get them to accept direct deposit. So I'm like, it's so easy. Here's our bank account number. But no, nobody's even brought that up. And we're asking now for them, we're offering credit card payment so that, a lot of clients want to put our fees on to get mileage and things like that. So that started. Direct deposit is now the next thing that we're asking, especially for our hospitality clients, but nobody's asked about crypto.
You get paid a lot faster with an ACH. You really do. People just see it and they just pay it, and it's nice.
I think the learning curve to accepting cryptocurrency is long. The same way that taking a credit card for some clients just took so long, but now they're finally doing it and you get paid very fast. So I would never say never. I just had this conversation with my husband a couple days ago about Bitcoin, and so you never know. It might be something that is a currency that we will, in the next few years, feel like it's open and welcome.
Yeah, the issue has not come up for us yet, so I'm surprised, but it's coming, like everything else, AI.
Well, listen, I told you it wasn't going to be the last question. Recently I read a report about an NFL player, I think it was Odell Beckham, who took payment in crypto, and he's killing it because he locked in his contract value at one number, and it's completely spiked, and now it's exponentially greater than it was before. Would you ever consider, for your firms, looking at something like that? I mean, it's kind of like an arbitrage if you think about it, where you could lock in additional gains for what you do by accepting payment value, but then you're taking a risk that it goes down. Is that too risky? Is that too risky?
Yeah, for me, I think it would be, I wouldn't want to lock anything into that. I mean, we charge typically a percentage of construction cost. The nice thing about that is you reconcile during the course of the design process so that if costs spike, you take advantage of some of that spike. So there's a little bit of that built into our contracts already, but going with something like locking in Bitcoin at a certain price for the duration of the projects are just too long. You could really lose your shirt, or you could make a fortune. It is a gamble.
Architecture fees are just so small in the whole course of things that to take risks. You know, we've been asked to even on spec product go in on it, you know, give our fees as part of the profit. But again, you're looking at 3-4 years out, and to take the fee on that type of a risk just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, locking in is terrifying. You know, the thought of that and being, you know, held on that on a 3 or 4 year project is painful to think about.
Yeah.
You're thinking about it now, aren't you?
You know, I had never thought about it before. It's a really good question. We'll think. Well, you know, I'll take it back to the partners, and we'll think about it.
Okay, good. All right. We've covered a lot here. Thank you, Julie Beuerlein, for designing an extraordinary space from which to have these conversations. Thank you, Pacific Sales Kitchen and Home, for presenting the WestEdge Theater. Thank you to all of our incredible speakers, panel sponsors like MTech and TimberTech, and of course, our amazing audience who came out, took notes, asked great questions, and provided an incredible energy for these conversations. Enjoy them. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you receive all of them, the full panel talks, to your feed the moment they're published. And we'll see you in November at the Barker Hangar for the 2025 edition of the WestEdge Design Fair.